So we're going to talk about the memoir essay now. And the memoir essay is different than the personal essay in that with the memoir essay, you're really looking back at a time in your life where your outlook changed, where some event or some happening deeply influenced the way that you look at the world and represents a time in which you changed. So you're still getting that narrative arc, right? You're still getting your that quest in which you are different at the end of the essay than you were at the beginning. But unlike the personal essay, which draws more on, incorporates research, considers a sort of global phenomenon that might be happening and using your own life anecdote to flesh that out, the memoir essay really is capturing a moment in which you changed, and it's more personal, although of course it should have global implications so that the reader is interested in reading it and sees how it relates to his or her own life. Okay, so the components of a memoir essay. So before watching this, I hope that you've read at least a few examples of memoir essays so that you have a good model in mind. And that, to me is the most important piece of any kind of writing, is just to do a lot of reading and to have models, because it can be done so many different ways, right? So you want to have an idea of what's out there, and then before you begin your own writing. So you want to tell a significant moment in your life history thus far. And again, that moment will resonate for other people if you are using the sort of craft and techniques that we've been talking about and that really relate to whatever you've learned about fiction writing. So getting good character, getting dialogue in there, setting in there. And in this, you are narrowing your focus. You're just taking a snapshot of this moment. So you're not trying to cover the whole globe, right? You're not trying to get your whole entire life in there. You're really doing this as a snapshot of a moment. Dialogue, again, something you've worked on with fiction, is involved in this. And you want to tell the truth, of course, in creative nonfiction. But can you remember exactly what was said in a dialogue? No. You are trying to get the gist of what was said. So you want to remain true to the gist of what was said in that dialogue. You are not going to capture word for word what people said. But the more you understand the character, both your own character and the character of the person with whom you are dialoguing, the more that character is also going to come out in dialogue. You're creating an emotional journey, okay? So remember that. And that's part of why this is grounded in fiction, is that our emotions are being appealed to as readers. And you want to show how you changed as a person. In some aspect of you changed, some way in which you look at the world changed. And there has to be that change. It cannot just be, even if you're reporting an extravagant event, an event that would change everybody, if you're not giving us that that way in which you changed, we're not getting an essay. So the narrative arc, you want to think of chronological order. That's the usual. It can be done other ways, but that is, probably the go-to way of creating this narrative arc. You want to outline your essay. You want to identify what is the complication of your essay. If you don't have a complication, there's going to be no change, right? It has to be that there's some obstacle, there's something that stuns or surprises you, something that you are coming up against. And then identifying what ways you changed, okay? So you're going to begin with a free write, and in fact, I'm going to give you time now to get your notebook. You can pause this video, and you're going to be pausing with each new slide. So get ready to write. I want you to do this with pen and paper in your writing notebooks, and as you work your way through each slide, by the end, you're going to have a draft. You're going to have a free write. Draft of your memoir, so a zero draft of this memoir essay. So you can also, of course, pause and come back to this later. It doesn't need to all be done in one straight shot. In fact, I would recommend that you take some time in between, for your writing. So first of all, what are you going to write about? Think back to an event that changed you in some profound way. And it doesn't need to be a huge event. It doesn't need to be, my parents got divorced, or, a death in the family, or anything huge like that. It can be seemingly small. If you were going to maybe relate it in a very, quick way, it would not surprise anybody. But if it changed you in some profound way, that is a good indication that it might be a great place to start for your own memoir. So, for instance, here's an example of mine. When I was 10 years old, my family moved to Paris for a year. And I was sent to a French public school, and I had I had to sort of learn the language really quickly, and they were way advanced in mathematics and in everything else pretty much. And I remember sitting there in math class, really not understanding anything, and we were working in a base 3 system. So instead of working in base 10, which is the usual for math, right? We count to 10. We usually do things in tens. They said, let's shift it to base 3. And I really didn't understand that. And I remember an engineer friend of my parents coming over to the house and trying to explain it to me. And as soon as it clicked, I started to see the ways in which language too can be shifted. To move away from sort of the predictable language that we use every day. And I started to think about, and this actually came later on when I started to, relate it to Gertrude Stein or to other authors. I could see how they would shift language into what would be the equivalent of a mathematical base 3. So, but I remember that just blowing my mind pretty much, right? And I have not written an essay about that. And that's why you're hearing me kind of working it out right now. And that's exactly what I want you to be doing. Finding a moment that sort of stunned or surprised you. And you're just going to, explore it. It might not come to anything. But, that to me, when I continue to sort of hearken back to that and to think, wow, and at different times in my life, and this was, when I was 10 years old, so a very long time ago, but, that moment keeps coming back to me. So that's something that I might choose to write about. And again, it probably wouldn't seem like much to anyone else, but I know that it profoundly changed me, and I haven't fully explored why. So that's a great indication that it might be a good place to start exploring. So I'd like you to come up with 4 possible topics and write them in your notebook. Now you're thinking of yourself as a character, and in our reading, and you have thought about, you've read about how you can change your own self into a character, and this is really important because part of what the memoir essay does, and you've seen this in examples, is get to a voice, a sense of humor, a way of seeing the world, right? But in order to do that, and again, we're going to draw on fiction for this, you're going to have to really get into, what is it that creates you? What is it that creates your voice, so that voice comes out clearly in the essay. We are really not interested when there's no voice. We're just not so interested. We have to be engaged and interested by you in order to want to read something that changed you. So that's pretty fundamental. So I want you to think about the following. So what tics or habits influence the way you lead your life? And you're going to be answering all these in your notebook. So again, you can pause at any time. List 5 things that you might find in your pocket on any given day. What sorts of things make you laugh? What is your greatest flaw? What is your greatest strength? And then just thinking details. Is there a certain way you dress? What makes your bedroom, living room, kitchen, etc. different from most? In other words, you're thinking about your setting, and setting is really important to be incorporating at some level where relevant. How might you use figurative language to help us see the world in the way that you see the world? So the person who says hope is a thing with feathers sees the world differently from a person who says hope is a 3-day-old banana. Okay, not a great metaphor, but I'm just giving you an example of, how we transmit so much about ourselves in figurative language. That's the most efficient way to transmit voice and to transmit sort of our own engagement with the world. Okay, so I want you to go to a place where you spend a lot of time, and then describe that place as you would see it when you're in a good mood on a good day. And then same place, describe it how you would see it in a bad mood on a bad day. Okay, so the place isn't changing. What's changing is your internal state. And that is going to affect the figurative language that you use. So I want you to see how powerful that figurative language is, because it can transmit so much about mood and the way that we see the world. So please complete this in your notebook before going on to the next exercise. So dialogue in memoir, and as we said, dialogue has to capture the gist of the conversation. You have not memorized a conversation you had when maybe you were 9 years old, and that's not the expectation here. But you have to capture the gist of what was said, and as well as possible, the gist of the characters of the people speaking. So that's where, characterization comes in, and you can do that same character exercise that we just did for somebody else, for another character that you are that is in this memoir piece. So dialogue must hold tension. Now, you don't necessarily have to have dialogue in your memoir piece. That is not necessary. But when you have a scene, and when it's important that we understand what's been said, you do need dialogue. Okay, dialogue is part of scene. It is the place where you stop to show us how people sound, to show us how they talk to each other. We don't just want your reported information, right? We want to be able to see. And this is opening up that piece of your life so that we can see and judge ourselves as readers, not have it all filtered through your judgment. Okay, so that's what dialogue is doing. We're getting to see how you're talking and getting to see how the other person's talking. And it must hold tension. It pushes the plot of the essay along. So think back to a dialogue relevant to one of the topics you listed. It should be between you and another person and should concern whatever is at stake in your essay. And again, those stakes, that's where the tension is, right? Can you transmit the gist of that dialogue? Most likely the two of you were skirting around the actual point of tension, which actually creates more tension, rather than saying straight out what you thought. So in other words, you probably weren't just saying, whatever that big argument was between you, or whatever the elephant in the room is, right? And that's why we even have that phrase, because most people don't speak exactly about what the tension is. They skirt around it. Most people are trying to navigate that tension so that they can get what they want from it. They can get the end result that they want. And that's where even more tension is built, okay? Because we sort of see how they try to navigate and see how they push back against each other. All right, so now begins the free write. And again, you can stop, you've done exercises now. It's probably time to put all that down and come back to this later when you can set aside a good hour. And yes, I do want you to set aside a good hour for this. You don't need to commit to the topic that you pick right now. This is just to play around with, just to sort of start warming up. But, do set aside a good chunk of time when you can do this. So you're going to simply write for the next hour. You're going to explore your own thoughts, try to recall the important people involved, identify what change took place in you, and then keep with the moment. You're not going all over the place, right? This is just an essay. It's an essay. It's not an entire memoir book. And you might have a book in you, but right now we're just working on the essay. So remember the details and voice through figurative language. That is what's going to bring the essay to life. All right, it's going to be those details and that voice through figurative language. And of course, enjoy the journey. And that brings us back to that idea of the quest, the journey that you're on. You do not know all the answers. You are not answering a specific question with a specific answer, but you are investigating, you're journeying, you're uncovering and revealing, and we are sort of figuring it out along with you along the way. In order to do that, though, we need to have a good sense of who you are, and all these other exercises are going to bring you to that point.